Okay, this is going to be out on the pipelines. I was looking up, and I in terms of the map of pipelines throughout the United States, and currently one's in place. And I realized that, for starters, the Dakotas, in terms of South Dakota, it's one of the few places that doesn't really have much, if any, pipelines in place. New York is actually one of the other states that doesn't have many. And of course now they're planning, if not already started in terms of Dakota Access, to build two of them. To build at least one in each, which is to say there's two in New York that are planned, or they're trying to get permits for. Thankfully, they haven't gotten them yet. So I don't believe that building has started. And then Dakota Access, that's opposite started. Dakota Access is the same company that currently they're merged with the company that is running Spectra, which is to say the Spectra is merged with Dakota Access. Spectra AIM, that is going to go dangerously close to the nuclear power plant that is Indian Point. It's one of the oldest nuclear power plant facilities in the United States, and it was originally scheduled to go offline and be shut down due to its age and planned obsolescence in 1979. So it's been actually leaking nuclear radiation for more than 20 years into the Hudson River Valley and into the Hudson River Basin. So it's been slow leak, but if the pipeline is indeed constructed in this spot, which is dangerously close to the infrastructure of that power plant, then you're not going to get a slow leak. You're going to get a freaking nuclear disaster meltdown. And therefore, you're going to get New York City, Rockland, and Westchester counties destroyed by nuclear radiation, and parts of Long Island as well, and neighboring New Jersey, Bergen County. And if that goes at the same time as or it could be a chain reaction between the two of them, because they're going to be rather close to one another, of what's called the Pilgrim pipeline, which will run along the Hudson River from Albany all the way down to a bit of New Jersey, down the route roughly of the New York State interstate. That will definitely destroy the Hudson River, along with all the farmland, all the wetlands, all the mountains in terms of the Ramapo Catskill Mountains, Catskills mainly, but also other mountain ranges. They'll all be destroyed in terms of the leaks there, and again, in all likelihood, it'll leach in and affect the nearby one, Spectra AIM, and so you'll get a twofer, which is to say, two disasters in the same area, which will wipe out at least a third of New York and at least half of New Jersey. It'll make both basically uninhabitable. We're talking about at least 5 million people, minimum. Could actually be 10 million. And about a third of the state in in square mileage. So that includes, by the way, the wine producing region of New York State, a good number of local farms, corn areas, so there's a lot of farming there, in addition to the fact that it's really the only route between state capital and the other biggest city in terms of population center in New York, which is New York City, which is, say, the 5 boroughs and Long Island. So that thoroughfare, that interstate, will be completely destroyed if there's a sizable leak. Both Dakota Access and New York, the weather ain't good, especially winter. It's actually, in fairness to the Dakotas, it's probably worse weather conditions than we experience in New York. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. But they have roads that are in better condition there. They do. Okay. I've seen them in the summertime, and I've seen it. The quality of the roads is excellent. They don't have massive delays in their infrastructure in terms of repairing highways. We do in New York State. And it's also a matter of how heavily traveled, though, the New York State Thruway is. It's one of the most heavily traveled commuter routes on the eastern seaboard. So this corridor, therefore, would be blocked off by oil spills and or nuclear radiation, probably both. And that's why I'm mentioning the concept of it being totally destroyed, because if you don't have a way between the two things, therefore the only way to get between the two is to fly, that's a major problem. Because, oh, by the way, in between Albany and New York City, that's where most of the airports in New York State are actually located. And that's another huge issue. So you'd have to actually come up with not only new car commuting paths, but you'd actually have to come up with new ones for air traffic as well. And yes, and again, that's another thing, is that when you consider, and I do want to discuss basically the concept that environmental assessment, which is it's a science, but it's also an art. But the biggest thing is that if it's not done comprehensively and it's not shown correctly, then, as is shown here, it could really mess people up big time. The biggest thing is that we're left out in terms of the environmental impact assessment in terms of the Dakota Access. They didn't consider the cultural ramifications at all. They didn't consider the sociological effects. Otherwise, it would have been stopped right there. Okay, unless, again, although it could be that they were just bigots, in which case, it's another reason for the Dakota Sioux to sue them in terms of the company, which quite possible. Then I say another because at this point they have at least a dozen strong cases to take Dakota Access to court for damages. Then, in terms of the New York region, in terms of those two pipelines, they didn't take into account, in terms of the one that's near Indian Point, they didn't take into account the concept that it was indeed so close to Indian Point. They didn't take into account the fact that that power plant is already leaking. And, oh, by the way, neither of these projects are going to even try to take into account each other. They should. They really, ethically perspective, they should account for each of the others' planned existence in their calculations as to whether this is safe or not. But they won't. And that's why I often post about them cumulatively, because I know ethically and environmentally speaking, it's a cumulative effect. There's no way, considering how close these two things are located, are going to, or at least are planned to be located to each other. They will not affect each other. It's not possible. New York State, I mean, it's not a tiny state, but it's not that big either when you consider the path of these two pipelines. And in all likelihood, I will actually map out an overlay of the two of them to show folks just how close they are. I do know one of the things that I do know is mapping, geographical information systems. Again, I will create a composite map to show folks, because it's ridiculous. In terms of the fact that it is a given that if they are both constructed, one of them will affect the other one when one of them leaks. And again, in all of these, and another thing that is not properly being considered, and it's been to some degree written about haphazardly, or with at least to some degree a trifle amount of sarcasm by people, correctly, because it's been the perfect kind of sarcasm, because it has a large element of truth in it. That the only real way that long-term, in terms of jobs, can be created by pipeline projects is if there's a leak, and if there are leaks repeatedly. Because the creation of pipelines, that's where the money is in terms of construction. After that, there isn't any real requirement heavy enough to be worth the money to monitor them for leaks. They inspect them every now and again, but it's not that common, and that's one of the reasons that spills are caught so late, which is again another problem. Realistically speaking, therefore, it doesn't make sense, even though it's commonly done, that they advertise great jobs from pipeline projects. It doesn't actually occur. There's a couple of short-term jobs, plentiful. Once those construction jobs, though, are done, which is to say, once the pipeline has been completed, it's online, there go 95% of the jobs. Whereas if you're talking about something that's far better for the environment, okay, like solar panels, okay, on everyone's rooftop or on every building, okay, and or small wind turbines on every building, okay, and or the concept of working for as an energy efficiency contractor to help and increase the energy efficiency of people's homes. Those jobs really don't go away. Solar panels, they need to be repeatedly checked on, okay, they really, unfortunately, they don't, with continual monitoring, they don't last huge lengths of time. So again, but again, keep in mind, because of the fact that they're local and they're scalable, that's one of the reasons that you can keep on doing stuff like this. And if you as a contractor are versed in a wide variety of green energy techniques, then you could put in a wide variety of them, and therefore you won't need to move. And there are always new batteries coming out in terms of storing your power, which again, installing batteries in people's homes, it's not a huge deal, but again, it's a continual job to monitor them and to monitor the what's called, in this case, the new format really of energy generation, which is called distributed energy generation, and in terms of a network generation, distributed energy generation, okay? And if you look at those jobs long term, they continually last, because even if the solar panel that you have, if that's good and if that lasts, a long time, you might still want to upgrade it, just like you do other things. In which case, guess what? That solar panel can be put on someone's home that either doesn't have the money or doesn't have the space that you do, and you reuse things. So it's not a long-term job thing. It doesn't fit cultural respects, and it sure as heck hurts the war and the battle against climate change. So lose, 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 lose. The only people that win with pipeline projects are the folks that want to decrease the global population. They win. And the folks that like to keep these scoreboards that they call bank accounts going up against each other. L'chaim, we'll get through this together.